A family of 4 sets out for a road trip through Death Valley, one of the most dangerous landscapes in America. The weather over 115 degrees, the terrain endless, isolated, and deadly. They were never seen again. No rescue, no clues, just a locked minivan and total silence. For 13 years, not a single piece of evidence surfaced until 2 unsuspecting hikers wandered off the trail and found something that would change everything. This is not just another missing persons case. This is the story of the Death Valley Germans, a family whose dream vacation became a nightmare that would baffle authorities for over a decade and expose the terrifying power of one wrong turn. On the 27th of July, 1996, a green Plymouth minivan should have been returned to a Los Angeles rental car company. Instead, it sat buried in sand in one of the most remote corners of Death Valley, its passengers nowhere to be found. What happened to Edgar Rimis, his girlfriend Cornelia Meyer, and their 2 young children remains one of the most chilling disappearances in American history. Let me take you back to the 8th of July, 1996. At Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, 4 excited travelers from Dresden, Germany, stepped off their plane and into what they believed would be the adventure of a lifetime. 4-year-old Egert Rimis was an architect with dreams bigger than his hometown could contain. Traveling with him was his 1-year-old son, George Weber. There was also Cornelia Meyer, known to friends as Connie, Egbert's 7-year-old girlfriend. And bringing up the rear was little Max Meyer, Connie's 4-year-old son. They had saved for this trip, planned every detail, and carried with them the excitement that comes with exploring a new continent from Seattle. They immediately flew to Los Angeles, where they picked up their rental car, a green 1996 Plymouth Voyager minivan. The family spent their first few days in Southern California San Clemente area, soaking up the coastal sunshine and getting their bearings in this vast new country. During the trip, Rimis called his bank in Germany requesting $1,500 to be wired to them in California, and then faxed his ex-wife, asking for additional funds which were never sent before entering the park. As the German family drove toward the park on the 22nd of July, 1996, temperatures soared to a blistering 124 degrees Fahrenheit. The asphalt shimmered with heat waves, and the air itself seemed to burn. But they had done their research, or so they thought. At the Furnace Creek Visitors Center, they purchased 2 copies of the Death Valley National Monument Museum text. Crucially, these were German-language editions that would guide their understanding of this alien landscape. Rather than spend money on expensive hotel accommodations, they chose to camp in their minivan that night in an area called Hanapa Canyon near Telescope Peak. The next morning, the 23rd of July, the family set out to explore. They visited various tourist sites, taking photographs with a Praktica 35mm camera. Investigators examined the visitor logbook for the Warm Spring Mine site on the route between the main valley and valley, and this had an entry by the German group on the 23rd of July saying in German, "We are going over the pass," and was signed Connie Egbert George Max. The pass referred to as most likely Mangle Pass, a route that looked simple enough on their German language maps, but was in reality an extremely treacherous path suitable only for 4-wheel drive vehicles. Their Plymouth minivan, built for suburban streets and highway travel, would have no chance on such terrain. Somewhere during their exploration, they also visited the geologist cabin in Butte Valley, taking an American flag as a souvenir. This wasn't vandalism, but rather the impulsive act of tourists collecting memories, not understanding the significance of what they were taking. As the day progressed and the heat became more intense, the family made a series of decisions that seemed logical at the time, but would prove fatal. Their guidebook showed what appeared to be a shorter route back to the main valley, a road down something called Amble Canyon. What they couldn't have known was that this wasn't really a road at all, but rather a rough mining track that had been abandoned for decades. And what they couldn't have imagined was that this wrong turn would make them disappear so completely that they would become one of America's most baffling missing persons cases. By the end of the 23rd of July, 1996, the German family was trapped in one of the most remote and inhospitable places on Earth. With no way to call for help and no realistic chance of rescue, their vacation had become a fight for survival. The family had booked a flight from Los Angeles to return to Germany on the 27th of July, 1996, but there was no evidence that they boarded the flight or departed the United States. Rimis's ex-wife, Heiko Weber, became concerned when her ex-husband and son did not return from their vacation, and she began to inquire about their whereabouts. The German authorities contacted their American counterparts, but with no crime scene, no witnesses, and no clear jurisdiction, the case fell into a bureaucratic void. The Germans were foreign nationals who had entered the country legally, and then nothing. They could have gone anywhere. They could have done anything. They could have staged their own disappearance for reasons no one could understand. The 21st of October, 1996. Nearly 3 months after the German family disappeared, Death Valley National Park Ranger Dave Briner was conducting routine aerial surveillance from a helicopter, searching for illegal drug manufacturing operations that sometimes sprouted in the desert's remote corners. In Anvil Canyon, about 2.4 miles downstream from Willow Spring, sat a vehicle that had no business being there. It wasn't the rugged four-wheel drive vehicle you'd expect to find on an abandoned mining road. Briner was immediately suspicious. Anvil Canyon had been designated as an official wilderness area since the Desert Protection Act of 1994, meaning public vehicles were prohibited. The old mining roads have been closed for decades, abandoned since the financial panic of 1907 ended most mining operations in the area. When the helicopter landed, Briner approached the vehicle cautiously. The 1996 Plymouth Voyager, with California license plates, was locked tight. 3 of its tires were completely flat, and the sand around it showed clear evidence that someone had tried desperately to drive it out despite the deflated tires. The axles were buried deep in sand, and it was obvious the van had been there for quite some time. But where were the occupants? Briner radioed for backup and began the process that would soon reveal the identity of the van's renters. When California Highway Patrol ran the license plates, the vehicle had been reported stolen by the Los Angeles Police Department on the 10th of September, 1996. It was owned by Dollar Car Reynolds and had been rented to 4 German tourists on the 8th of July. But this discovery raised more questions than it answered. If the Germans have been stranded here since late July, or were their bodies in Death Valley summer heat, survival without adequate shelter and water would have been measured in hours, not days. On the 22nd of October, Death Valley National Park investigator Eric Iman was flown to the scene to begin a detailed examination. Apart from Dave Briner's tracks from a previous day, no other footprints were visible around the vehicle. What he found inside the van painted a picture of a family vacation that had taken a devastating turn. The van contained everything you'd expect from tourists: luggage, clothing, children's toys, camera equipment, and multiple rolls of film. There were full bottles of beer and bourbon, sleeping bags, and camping equipment. Most tellingly, there was one of the German language guidebooks purchased at the Furnace Creek Visitor Center, but there was also evidence of how far off course the family had wandered. The American flag taken from the geologist cabin in Butte Valley proved they had visited that remote location. Food wrappers and evidence of human waste near the van suggested they had spent at least one night at this location. The altitude at the van's location was about 3,000 foot, which meant that on the 23rd of July, the date investigators believed the family became stranded. The high temperature would have been around 107 degrees Fahrenheit, with overnight lows around 79 degrees. Survivable conditions perhaps if you had adequate water and shelter, fatal conditions if you didn't. The van was carefully removed from Anvil Canyon on the 23rd of October, and immediately the largest search and rescue operation in Death Valley's history was launched. The 23rd of October, 1996. As the sun rose over Death Valley, the largest search and rescue operation in the park's history was about to begin. The discovery of the abandoned Plymouth Voyager had transformed what was once a simple missing persons case into a race against time. though everyone involved knew that after 3 months in the desert, this was now a recovery mission, not a rescue. The China Lake Mountain Rescue Group arrived first, followed by trackers from the Indian Wells Valley Search and Rescue Group. 8 mounted units from the Kern County Sheriff's Mounted Search and Rescue brought horses capable of covering rough terrain that vehicles couldn't navigate. The search teams spread out from Anvil Canyon like spokes on a wheel, each group taking responsibility for different sectors of the vast, unforgiving landscape. On the first day, searchers made a discovery that sent chills down their spines. About 1.7 miles east of where the van was found, a member of the China Lake Mountain Rescue Group spotted something that didn't belong in the natural desert environment: a butt-ice beer bottle, half buried in sand, next to a scraggly bush. Next to the bottle, someone had cleared a ledge in the dirt and left behind what investigators later described as a large seat print, evidence that someone had sat there for an extended period. The bottle matched those found in the van, and its location suggested that at least one member of the German family had walked east from their stranded vehicle. But this single clue only deepened the mystery. If the Germans had walked east from their van, where they have gone from there, and why had no other trace of them been found? Day 2 brought expanded search efforts. Teams arrived from NY County, Nevada, and Inyo County, California. 2 helicopters joined the operation, their rotors beating rhythmically over the desert as they scanned for any sign of the missing family. Search areas included more of Anvil Canyon, portions of Warm Spring Road, Butte Valley, Mingle Pass, and the route between the canyon and the main valley. The searchers were professionals, many with decades of experience in desert rescue operations. They knew how to read the landscape, how to spot the subtle signs that indicated human passage through this hostile environment. They followed every wash, checked every cave, and examined every possible shelter where a desperate family might have sought refuge from the killing heat. But the desert revealed nothing. On the 25th of October, different search teams went out to look in and around Death Valley. One team searched between Amble Canyon and Badwater Road. Another team from Victorville looked around the southeast edge of Valley. A ranger from the Bureau of Land Management checked the west side of Mangle Pass between Barra and Barker Ranch. A team from Lake Mee surged from Anvil Canyon over the mountains and into Butte Valley. The Indian Wells team carefully searched around Willow Spring at the top of Anvil Canyon. Another group, CLMRG, started in the middle of Anvil Canyon, then searched north and west from there. On the 26th of October, the 4th and final day of the search, teams continued looking for the missing group in the harsh desert environment. The Death Valley National Park team searched areas north of Warm Spring Canyon and nearby mine areas where a lost person might have sought shelter. The Victorville team focused on the area around Stripe but in Valley, while the Lake Mee team also searched Stripe but walked along Warm Spring Canyon Road. A BLM Rangers searched the west side of Mingle Pass and nearby routes the group might have used if they were heading toward Berat. The Indian Wells team searched near Warm Spring Road and West Side Road after footprints were found in the area. A new team from Apple Valley searched along West Side Road heading north from Warm Spring Canyon Road in case the group had looked for shelter there. 2 helicopters also scanned all areas around Amble Canyon, including the southern parts, but high winds made it difficult to search from the air. With no new clues found since the beer bottle on the first day, and no hope whatsoever that the party would be found alive, the official search was called off. A spokesperson from Death Valley National Park said around 250 people took part in the search. The team searched smartly and focused on the most likely areas, but still there was no sign of the missing German family. The case was filed away, joining the ranks of America's unsolved mysteries. Conspiracy theories began to emerge, each more elaborate than the last. Some suggested that Eggert Reimers had been trying to reach the China Lake Naval Weapons Center, seeking classified information about hybrid propulsion technology. According to this theory, the family had either been recruited into a Black Ops government program or eliminated because they had seen something they weren't supposed to see. The theory gained traction because of Egg's profession as an architect and his rumored interest in exotic technologies, but those who knew him dismissed such speculation as the product of overactive imaginations. Eggert was a family man on vacation, not an industrial spy. Another theory suggested that the family had staged their own disappearance. Eggert's colleagues remembered his talk of moving to Costa Rica, of starting fresh in a new country. Perhaps Death Valley had been chosen as a place to disappear because it was so remote, so unforgiving that no one would think to look for people who had supposedly died there. But this theory too had problems. Why would anyone choose to disappear in one of the world's most dangerous environments? Why risk the lives of 2 children for an elaborate deception? And how could 4 people, including a 4-year-old, maintain such a secret for years? More disturbing theories involve foul play. Perhaps the family had encountered criminals engaged in illegal activities in a remote desert. Drug manufacturers, human traffickers, or simply dangerous individuals who saw the German tourists as threats or opportunities. Death Valley's vast emptiness would certainly provide ample opportunity to dispose of evidence. Tom Mahood was not a professional investigator. He was a search and rescue worker with Los Angeles County, someone who understood both the science of survival and the art of finding what others had lost. In 2009, 13 years after the German family disappeared, he read about their case and couldn't let it go. What struck Mahood wasn't just the tragedy of 4 people vanishing without a trace. It was illogical inconsistencies and how the case had been handled. He approached the mystery like an engineer approaches a complex problem, breaking it down into component parts and analyzing each piece with fresh eyes. Mahood theorized that everyone had been searching in the wrong places. Using the German language guidebook found in the van, he traced the route the family most likely intended to take. The booklet showed a path west through Butte Valley and Mingle Pass, past the infamous Barker Ranch, where Charles Manson's followers had once hidden, then north to the ghost town of Berat, and on toward Uceda National Park. The family's movements suddenly made sense when viewed through this lens. They had left their camping spot in Hanapa Canyon on the morning of the 23rd of July and driven south to Warm Spring Road, turning west. The road would have seemed fine at first, encouraging them to continue toward what they believed was a legitimate route to their next destination. At the Warm Spring camp, they probably stopped hoping to find someone who could tell them about road conditions ahead. Instead, they found only a deserted mining camp. So, they signed the register and continued west. When they reached the geologist cabin in Valley, they again hoped to find someone who could provide guidance. Finding it empty, they took the American flag as a souvenir and pressed on to Mingle Pass. But Mingle Pass proved impassable for their minivan. The guidebook offered what appeared to be an alternative route, a road down Anvil Canyon that seemed to lead back to the main valley. Faced with the choice of turning back or trying the shorter route, they chose the latter. Mahood's analysis differed from official searchers in one crucial way. He believed the family had headed south from their stranded van, not east or north as others had assumed. While traditional search and rescue doctrine suggested that lost people would try to return to their last known safe location, Mahood theorized that Eggert Remis would have looked at his maps and seen the northern boundary of the China Lake Naval Weapons Center only 8 or 9 miles to the south. To a desperate man trying to save his family, a military installation would have seemed like salvation. Surely there would be people there, water, radio communications, and the ability to call for help. The hills between the van and the base didn't look insurmountable on the map, especially to someone who didn't understand the true nature of Death Valley's terrain. Mahood believed the family had spent at least one night at the van, evidenced by the waste material found nearby, then locked the vehicle and headed east down Anvil Canyon to the point where the beer bottle was found. From there, they had turned south toward what they hoped would be rescue at the China Lake facility. But this was a route no one had searched thoroughly. Official searchers had dismissed the possibility, reasoning that experienced desert travelers would never head south and is such forbidding terrain. But the Germans weren't experienced desert travelers. They were tourists with incomplete maps and a desperate need to save their children. Armed with this theory, Mahood began his own search in 2009, 13 years after the family's disappearance. He was joined by Les Walker, and together they began exploring the rugged, desolate terrain southeast of Galola Wash, about 8 miles from the abandoned van, and 4 miles for the China Lake boundary fence. What they found there would finally solve one of America's most enduring mysteries and bring a measure of peace to the families who had waited so long for answers. On the 12th of November, 2009, Tom Mahood and Les Walker found Cornelia Meyer's remains scattered across about 150 meters of desert floor. Her passport and bank identification with a photograph confirmed her identity. Les found a toothbrush and a tube of some sort of salve or toothpaste in a small side wash to the northwest. They found remains of a small shoe that could have been a woman's shoe or that of a child. A portion of Cornelius's daily planner was found with numerous business cards from places the Germans had stayed on their trip. In addition to the 2-liter wine bottle, they also found a clear bottle about 70 foot downstream. This was later identified as one of the Bud bottles from the van. Over the following days, they also found the remains of Egbert Rimis. The location was exactly where Mahud's theory had predicted, in terrain so rugged and remote that it's no wonder previous searches had missed it. The family had indeed headed south from their stranded van, seeking salvation at a military base that probably had no permanent personnel and certainly no ability to mount a rescue operation. The discovery put an end to 13 years of speculation and conspiracy theories. There had been no government cover-up, no staged disappearance, and no elaborate deception, for people had simply made a series of logical decisions that led them into a death trap from which there was no escape. Subsequent searches found additional remains, though there wasn't enough DNA evidence to positively identify them as belonging to the 2 children. But the mystery of what happened to the Death Valley Germans had finally been solved. The story of the Death Valley Germans is ultimately a tragedy of good intentions and bad information. A family who should have lived long instead became victims of circumstances they couldn't have anticipated and dangers they couldn't have understood. But their story teaches us something profound about human nature, about the power of hope over experience, and about the extraordinary lengths people will go to in order to find the truth. Egbert Rimis was trying to show his son and his girlfriend's child the wonders of America. Cornelia Meyer was embracing adventure with a man she loved. One-year-old George was experiencing the world beyond his small German city. 4-year-old Max was simply along for the ride, trusting the adults to keep him safe. When their vacation became a nightmare, they made decisions that seemed logical at the time. They tried to find an alternative route when their first choice proved impossible. They attempted to reach what they believed was safety when their vehicle became stranded. They walked toward what appeared on their maps to be a place where hell could be found. Each decision made sense individually. Collectively, they led to tragedy. But the real heroes of this story are the people who refused to give up. Tom Mahud and Les Walker spent countless hours researching the case, hiking through dangerous terrain and following logical threads that professional searchers had dismissed. Their dedication brought closure to families who had waited more than a decade for answers. The German families in Dresden could finally hold memorial services with some certainty about what had happened to their loved ones. The mystery that had haunted them for 13 years was finally solved, allowing them to grieve properly and begin the process of healing. Mahud later expressed frustration with the lack of cooperation from some authorities, noting that without his and Walker's efforts, the remains might never have been found. Their success, where professionals had failed, demonstrates the power of persistence and fresh thinking in solving cold cases. The case also serves as a sobering reminder about the dangers of America's wilderness areas. Death Valley is breathtakingly beautiful, but it's also one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Every year, unprepared visitors underestimate its dangers and find themselves in life-threatening situations. The lessons are clear. Carry plenty of water and food when venturing into desert areas. Use appropriate vehicles for the terrain you're planning to traverse. Inform others of your planned itinerary before departing. Carry communication devices and know how to use them. Most importantly, don't rely solely on maps that may not reflect current road conditions or dangers. The Death Valley Germans have become part of American folklore. Their story told and retold as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the power of hope. Their tragedy reminds us that every missing person case represents real people with real families who deserve answers, no matter how long it takes to find them. The desert keeps many secrets, but this one has finally been told. But sometimes, when hope seems lost and answers seem impossible, the human spirit proves stronger than the desert itself.